Good afternoon, everybody, or should I say good evening. You're very welcome to join me on this live event for PCI College. My name is Jade Lawless. I'm the head of counselling and psychotherapy programs in PCI College, and I'm with you this evening to talk to you about our postgraduate courses. So before I get into that, I'd just like to give you a very brief introduction to us here in PCI College. So we are the leading provider of training and education in the area of mental health, counselling and psychotherapy. And we've been up and running for 30 years, just coming up to 30 years actually. So real wealth of experience behind us. We were founded by Liam McCarthy and Josephine Murphy, who had a vision for second chance education and giving back to society. And really, that's the ethos that we try to carry forward, or that I think we do achieve that, carrying that forward throughout the courses that we have in existence today. So, what I want to talk to you particularly about is our suite of postgraduate programs. So we have a number of master's programs, postgraduate certificate, and some advanced diplomas that I'd like to bring into your awareness today. I suppose now more than ever, people are reevaluating where they're at in terms of their life choices, maybe career choices. And it might be time to think about getting more information if you're in that position where you're looking at the area within which you work, or upskilling, or perhaps you're thinking about how you might like to give back to certain groups within society, within the profession that you currently work. So much has changed in the last few months since the pandemic has, hit us all so very, very unexpectedly. And I think now is a good time for people to reevaluate their choices and invest in meaningful career paths where possible, I suppose. And in saying that, society, we know we've heard multiple reports, and in the profession of counselling and psychotherapy, it's much talked about that we're going to feel the vibrations of the effects of the pandemic for many years to come. A new generation of trauma as a result of the pandemic that will affect everybody, from children right up to the elderly. So a lot of the courses that I talk to you about this afternoon touch on some of those specialist client groups that will be especially affected by the pandemic and the fallout of the same. So I'll start with our master's programs. And there will be room for question and answers. So please feel free to type in a question and I'll answer it as it naturally occurs, or if we have time at the end. So I'd love to be a little bit more interactive if you're up for asking a few questions. So our master's programs, we have a master's in child and adolescent counselling and psychotherapeutic skills. And we have a master's program in addiction counselling and psychotherapy. Both of those programs, while they're in very different areas, they both look similar in terms of structure, content, timetable, things like that. So I'll just start with the basics around those courses. They're both 2 years in length, and they both involve clinical practice. They're very experiential courses. All of our lecturers as well, just to say, our program leaders of our courses are all practicing therapists, specialists in their areas. So all of our content is taught through that lens of clinical practice, experiential learning, application to self. So really, really interactive and informative and reflexive. No matter which course you're interested in doing, that would be the model that we follow. And all of our courses rest on sort of 3 legs of a stool, if you like. So we have the first leg, which we talk about as personal development. And that would tap into some requirements around, some of our courses would require students to engage in personal therapy. And also there is personal development, reflexive exercises and course content built into the programs. The second leg of the stool is the theoretical components of whichever program you choose to study. So it's all evidence-based practice, it's all well researched, and it's framed around modern, contemporary, as well as seminal theorists in the relevant area. And then the very third leg, which is the one that brings it all together really, and the one that we really take forward, is the clinical practice piece. So that is practice of skills, development of skills, refinement of skills, and a placement component, which means not just practicing skills in the classroom setting, but also engaging in a placement, whether that be through a private practice if you're on the master's programs, or also our organizational placements, which we can collaboratively arrange with our students. So they're the three common themes across all of the programs that I'm going to be talking to you about today. The Masters in Child and Adolescent Psychotherapy and the Addiction Masters, they're both 2 years in length. And the first year has 4 modules and the second year has 5 modules. Each module is 30 hours in length, and all of the modules are continuous assessment. So one of the things we prize ourselves on in PCI College is formative learning, formative experience. And that is really our ability to, I suppose, collectively put together information and integrate it as we go along, which is why we don't focus on exams. We work on continuous assessment. It's also a little bit more manageable for students as well, and takes out the element of needing to cram. Our assessments are very varied. So they link in with the 3 legs that I've already spoke to you about. So they could range from something like a skills assessment, which is a live Viva type assessment, to a case study, which is more of a reflection on the skills, to an essay, simple essay. Well, essays are not simple, I know that, but I guess it's a simple assessment mode that we'd be used to. We also have a thesis, a dissertation in each of the courses as well. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. There might be presentations, group work. So in the child and adolescent course, actually, there's also an observation of play skills as well. So really, really interesting and varied approaches to assessment. But as I said, all continuous. So no pressure to have everything learned by a certain date in a certain way and spiel it off by rote. We want you to integrate and learn and take this forward forevermore. So let's look then at the clinical piece. So I did mention that's one of the really, really important legs of the stool. On our master's program, there is a requirement for students to do 100 hours of clinical work. So that would involve you getting engaged with the placement. Now, depending on which background you come from, what qualification you come into the program with, and I'll speak to you about entry requirements after this. But depending on where you come into the program, you may end up in doing your placement hours throughout your own private practice for those who are already qualified as counsellors and psychotherapists, or for those who are coming from different backgrounds, for example, like a social care worker or a support worker, family support worker. You may then end up in an organisation or a particular popular placement on our child and adolescent program is to be placed within a school. So there's lots of different options for placements, but there is that 100-hour clinical requirement. And the way in which we will support you to find the right placement is a collaborative approach. So we have a clinical placement team in the college, and they will work with you on, first of all, getting you set up and ready to start seeing clients. There's a whole process involved in that is worked through within your program, and you're very well supported in that. And then once that's all okay in terms of you're ready, the college feels you're ready and you're signed off and ready to go, our clinical placement team will work with you on either establishing a placement link for you or helping you to find new placements that we could then set up a link with you for. Or if you're a private practitioner, you may and end up using your own practice, and we will work with you on that as well. So lots of options there, and you're very much not on your own in that. In addition to clinical practice, those of you who are already qualified counsellors and psychotherapists will know the importance of supervision when it comes to client work. So that is also a clinical requirement. The ratio is in line with the student ratio, which is 1:5, which means for every 5 sessions of client work that you do, you will do 1 hour of supervision with an accredited supervisor. And the reason why we have the requirement in related to clinical practice and supervision is simply to have that lived experience. I'm so sorry, giggle there. I can see my daughter in the background doing some sort of dance moves. Well, that's life, working from home. Apologies, but enjoy the show anyway. So really, one of the reasons why we have the requirement for clinical practice placement hours is simply because that is the most fundamental piece of the program. That's the part that you're going to leave with there. That's the skills acquisition. That's your opportunity to translate what you've learned and integrated in the classroom and apply it to a real life setting. It also will allow you, in the safety of the training, reflect on that, make the mistakes, learn from the mistakes, bring all of that to supervision and hone and cement your ability in that skills area. We like to practice what we preach. So as I said, we're all practicing therapists and specialists in our own areas. And as a result, then, it's really important that our students also have that opportunity to practice in the area that they eventually will end up working in after they qualify. So that's really, really important to us. And it's really great learning experience. And a lot of our students build great links and contacts through their placement work as well. So it's lots of payoffs to doing client hours. So the other element of clinical practice is personal therapy. So on our master's programs, there is also a requirement to continue or re-enter for those who aren't currently in therapy, to work with a personal accredited therapist. And again, it's a hammock of support for yourselves in addition to supervision. It allows you to process anything that is coming up for you as a result of the work that you're doing on the program, but also just in your life in general. Specifically in relation to the programs that I'm talking about at the moment, child and adolescent addiction, even our family program, in the content of those programs can be quite triggering. And it's really important that you as a student then have a safe place to process all of the, I suppose, personal stuff that comes up for you around that. So we really do believe and value personal therapy and personal development, which is why the programs have those elements built into them. So that's kind of the nutshell of both of those programs, and that all of that translates into the advanced diploma as well, advanced diploma in clinical supervision, which I'll talk to you a little bit about later on. But that's really what we're looking at in terms of the structure of the program. I said I'd talk to you about entry requirements, and the other important thing when I think of structure is also to let you know that the program is run from October to around May every year, and it also runs one weekend a month. So in terms of workload, it's you get your timetable well in advance, and you can plan then those weekends that you need to be in class, and work your life around that. You'll have your timetable the year in advance, so it's quite manageable from that perspective. And then in terms of the entry requirements, so it is a master's program, and they both are master's programs. So as a result of that, the entry requirement is minimum degree, level 8 on the NFQ or equivalent. If you don't meet those criteria, there are other pathways into the program, one of which being clinical portfolio. So, for example, you might have been working in the field of child and adolescent work for a long time, or working with addiction, and have quite a good portfolio built up along with an appropriate qualification. that's lower than a master's. So we would look at that as well. So there are other avenues in, but the minimum requirement is the level 8 on a technical level. But we would be happy to talk with you and talk you through the portfolio process if you weren't sure whether you met the requirements or not. So feel free to drop us a line anytime and we'll help you out with those entry requirements. So I think that's the basics really of the structure of the programs. Other than that, then it's really about getting into the content. And the content is really, really rich in both programs. The child and adolescent program focuses on everything from the history, the theoretical underpinnings of play therapy, working with children and adolescents, the ethical components, legal components, to play therapy, sound therapy, art therapy, music therapy, working with trauma, working with families. It's really, really, really rich. And we keep it up to date and as evidence-based as possible. And because we're validated by Middlesex University, there's a real responsibility on our end to have everything quality checked and just right. So in terms of content, it's pretty robust and rich program. Likewise with the addiction program, actually. So the content there that you could look forward to, really, it's quite similar in nature in terms of you being introduced to the theories, the history, the framework, models of addiction. It also looks at things like dual diagnosis. You'll look at the DSM and how that fits in, DSM-5, theories, harm reduction models, again, family dynamics, codependency. It's quite a lot of skills-based stuff as well, in addition to what you do on the CNA program. All your skills are, play therapy, music therapy. Where that differs on the addiction program, the skills that are brought in there are motivational interviewing, CBT, and how all of that lines up with your baseline counselling and psychotherapeutic skills that can be transferred into this work. So really, really rich content again. And as I said, all our lecturers are established practitioners in the field with a wealth of experience. So child development, psychology, also on both programs as well, because that feeds into different areas of either topic. So that's really the majority of, I guess, what I can say in a very light way about the programs. I did mention that they have a dissertation attached to them. So that is a piece of research that is due in year 2. And students are supported to get through that piece of research, because sometimes it can be very daunting to think about doing a thesis, doing a dissertation. But the way in which we support our students to work through the dissertation is there's a whole module on it, first of all. So you will be supported around learning about the types of research analysis that you would have to do. So, for example, a lot of the students will gear towards qualitative analysis just naturally, because that's a little bit like what we do in therapy anyway. It's all about the narrative, isn't it? And themes and stuff like that. So you'll be well supported with an expert in research on that, to work through the structure and put together a proposal and how do you analyze data and all of that kind of thing. And then there is a supervisory process where you get feedback on a couple of drafts related to your thesis and things like that. So lots of room for error, lots of room for, making changes before the final draft is submitted. And the thesis is 7,500 words, which seems like a lot, but when you get into the nitty gritty of what's involved and the structure of a thesis, it's quite a challenge to write to that amount. So don't try not to be too daunted by that element. But that's a really important component of any master's or postgraduate program. And we also have a portal that has a huge amount of resources in terms of supporting academic writing. We have an academic writing knowledge base, which is just currently being updated for the new academic year. And we've lots of support, videos, tools, templates, research webinars planned throughout the academic year as well. So you're well supported in that area, just to give a bit of reassurance there. So that's the majority of what I can say about the master's programs without getting too in depth. If anybody has any questions about the specifics, I'd be happy to answer them at the end. So what I'll do then is move into our postgraduate program. So we have a postgraduate certificate in family therapeutic counselling skills. And the postgraduate program is actually a precursor onto the master's. So it's essentially 1 year program, but there is an option to upgrade to the master's, which follows the same format as the previous programs that I've just mentioned. But the postgraduate in family therapeutic and counselling skills focuses on working with families, working with couples. It's actually quite relational in its content. So even though the title is geared towards working with families, it's actually applicable to working even with individuals because we all exist in a relational context. So it really looks at very interesting things like life scripts and how they play out in your own relationship dynamics, and then how we can work with those kind of concepts with either individuals or couples or families. So it's quite a large reach in terms of how you can transfer that learning into different modalities or different client groups, if you like. And again, it follows a similar format to the other programs in that you've got your 3 legs of the stool that I mentioned already, and that you've got your theoretical underpinnings. There's a strong reflexive personal development element to the program, and then you've got your specialist, your baseline skills and how they apply, but also your specialist skills. And the specialist skill that's looked at on the postgraduate program is EFT, emotionally focused therapy. So that's a really, really interesting one. And again, mostly used for couples, but very effective techniques just for understanding relationship dynamics in general. So a really, really interesting program. There isn't a requirement to do clinical practice on this program, and that's where this differs from the master's level. However, if you do want to then upgrade to the master's, that's where the clinical components would kick in. So that option is always there, and it just moves later in your study path rather than in the first year. So the entry requirements are the same, level 8 or equivalent, or portfolio-based entry. So I suppose, why would anybody think about working or upskilling in any of those areas at the moment? For me, it's really important. There are actually 3 of probably the main important areas that we know have been affected by the pandemic at the moment. So we know how difficult quarantine and lockdown and the various phases that we're in and going through have been on everybody. So it's not to dilute that in any way, shape, or form. But we also know that there has been an increase in anxiety among children. There has been an increase in engagement in addictive behaviours, and particularly behavioural addictions, which our master's covers. There has been an increase in reports of domestic violence incidents. That's all happening in the context of the home and in the context of society at the moment. We're, as I said at the beginning of this talk, we're going to be feeling the effects of this pandemic for years to come. I think we haven't even tipped the iceberg. The amount of trauma that is going to come as a result of what's happened in the world. Now, it's not anybody's fault, but the reality is this is where we're at, and this is what the future of counselling and psychotherapy is going to have to work with. The fallout. And I think children, those with addictive tendencies, and the family are very severely hit at the moment in terms of their ability to move through, cope, process, and then higher levels of trauma than we would have seen previously. So I think now more than ever, there is a real call to action for us to think about, if you're a counsellor or psychotherapist, to think about, well, what is the area that I would love to make a difference in? if you already work in this field, in either of those fields. So like our programs are open not just to counsellors and psychotherapists, but to people who, other professionals who work in, let's say, work in addiction already, or in family support areas, or youth projects, or teachers, social workers, social care workers, psychologists. So there's room for everybody on our programs. And whichever area you're working within at the moment, it's important to think about, well, where do I see myself in the future, and what do I have the skills, that do I have enough skills right now to deal with what I need to deal with, what I know is coming down the path. And the other important thing I think to mention as well is the recent government mental health strategy that was published last month, I think it was. So it's the updated version of A Vision for Change. It's called Sharing the Vision. If anybody hasn't had a look yet, just Google that, you'll get that online, Sharing the Vision. And this is the government's 10-year mental health strategy. And what's really, really interesting about it is that they focus on early intervention as key. So it's been recognised. This is a really big thing for the government to put on paper, that it's recognised that early intervention is key, that mental health support should be systemic. It should start early at home and within the community. And really, that's the skill level we're talking about here on these programs. We're looking at how to support within the early childhood, the family unit, and within, like we know, addiction recovery and a lot of addiction support is community based. So if the government are able to put their money where their mouth is in terms of this strategy, we can expect a lot of investment in early intervention. And we see a lot of change in relation to, well, not change yet, but a lot of talk in relation to schools and the need for counsellors in schools. And even as recent as yesterday, the IACP had a really, really successful meeting with the body for looking at introducing counsellors into the school setting. And there's a real open mind, well, maybe not open-mindedness, that's a bit of a reach, but they're starting to explore and recognise the need there. So with the Vision for Change in mind, or Sharing the Vision strategy in mind, I think these master's programs are really well placed and worth considering. The other courses that I do want to bring your attention to as well are our advanced diplomas. So our first advanced diploma is in clinical supervision, and this is a qualifying program. It will allow you to be a qualified supervisor. For those of you who are already accredited with the IACP, it fulfills IACP accreditation criteria for supervisors, which is fantastic. And it also it doubles up as a qualification for a group supervisor, because it has a module specifically on group supervision. And that module not only introduces students to group dynamics and group process and supervision within the group setting, but it also equips and skills students with qualifying as a standalone group supervisor, which is a whole different skill set in itself. So in a way, it's a type of dual qualification. This program is quite unique though, because it expands supervision across a number of professions. So it's specifically geared towards counselling and psychotherapy, but also inclusive of other clinical disciplines. And we use a model on that program, Hawkins and Shoei's model of supervision, which allows that. And it has a number of kind of bridging concepts that really complements all of the helping professions. So the likes of counselling and psychotherapy is the one we're most familiar with in this college, but also psychologists, social workers, social care workers, teachers. We've had recently also a solicitor or a barrister on the program in the last intake. So it really does reach, it is appealing to a number of different helping professions. And so that's a really, really robust program. Again, it's validated by Middlesex University, so it has that quality assurance, it has that university standard, and entry requirements there is it's levels. I'm getting confused now with the UK versus the European. So it's a minimum degree, and again, there's other options. So we can work with you on entry requirements around that. And if you are looking to be accredited with the IACP, for example, there are other specific requirements, like you have to have a certain number of years practice as an accredited counsellor underneath your belt as well. So there's a little few nuances there that any of the team would be happy to answer. Mike Hackett is the program leader for that program, and he's very available to have a chat with anyone who's wondering if they'd be suitable in terms of entry criteria for that program, as would I. And the program is run from October to May, as I said before, so it's shorter than the rest of the programs, and it does have the clinical elements piece. But the requirements are a little bit less than on the master's program. It's 50 hours of clinical practice, but it's split to internal versus external clinical practice. So within the program itself, you will do 25 hours of that practice, supervised practice within the course. And then it is up to you as a student to engage in 25 hours of external clinical practice, with the ratio of supervision being at 1:5 on that program too. So, and again, our clinical placement team can help you with that, or help you convert your private practice to our placement criteria, which is very easily done. So there's lots of options for that. And again, the assessments on that program, all continuous and varied. So lots of skills work, stuff around contracting. There's a clinical package, which is a really, really interesting piece. It involves it involves a transcript of a piece of your work with a lot of reflection, reflexive elements, and also then a presentation around that. So it's really, really rich, lots of feedback from your course lecturers, who again are practicing supervisors, and lots of peer feedback and practice within the program. So really, really, really interesting program. And then finally, the course that I want to talk to you about is our Advanced Diploma in Online Counselling and Psychotherapy. This is our brand new course. We developed this program with the pandemic in mind. So as a result of everything sort of shutting down and being online, even hence myself being here online today instead of in our physical campus, clearly there is a need for learning more and practicing more and working more online in the field of counselling and psychotherapy. So this course is really unique in that it doesn't just introduce counsellors and psychotherapists to the area of working online. It allows students to gain a mastery in that area and proficiency. So it goes beyond just knowing what you need to do to work online. It goes beyond that. It gives additional skills and, as I said, proficiency. So the three areas that course, so there's 3 modules on that course, and the 3 modules are focused on, the theories, introduction to the theories of working online, and again, all evidence-based practice. There is an ethical, technology, ethics, and the legal implications of working online, and that will introduce you to all the different types of platforms, working with risk, contracting, looking at the disinhibition effect, all of those kind of things. And the 3rd module then is focuses on then transferring all those skills from the previous modules into an actual business plan. So developing an online practice is the 3rd module. And that looks at things like, as I said, developing a business plan and maintaining and retaining clients in an online setting. But also it looks at things like self-care, boundaries, working with international clients, because, that door is open potentially as well if There's no travel barriers as such anymore. So it's very comprehensive in nature. And again, it meets the minimum criteria as set by the IACP in terms of the guidelines for working online. It's very in-depth, very robust, and it's 1 weekend a month, like the other programs. But it's shorter in that it's run over 5 months. So it starts really soon, actually. It starts on the 12th of September and it'll be finished by February, approximately mid-February. And again, it's all continuous assessment and a variety of different types of assessments. A lot of skills practice built in, and that program is solely online. Again, we really like to practice what we preach. So why not model what we're setting the course up to be? And so that course is completely online, and it's really, really interesting, really, really necessary. Why would I do a course like that if I'm a counsellor and psychotherapist? And actually, the entry requirements for this program is to have a qualification in counselling and psychotherapy already. So that is one of the entry requirements. It's not really applicable to the other professions, unlike some of the other programs that I talked about. But why would I do this program as a counsellor and psychotherapist? I'm already qualified. I've been practicing, a number of years. I train therapists. Like, what else should I really need to know at this stage? Well, a lot. Actually, it turns out a lot, especially when it comes to working online, because it's a minefield. It's a totally different arena, and there's lots of aspects that we don't think about often enough, like risk management. How do we assess risk in that online setting on the telephone? Because that's also a medium of online. How do you manage your boundaries, your self-care, the disinhibition effect? Do you know enough about why online therapy is a valid form of therapy? So it really goes into all of that in detail and more and more. So I'm really, really excited about that course. I hope you are too, because it's really worth a look. Our program leader there is Graham Gill Emerson, and again, he or I, or Mike, who was also involved in the development of this program, would be more than happy to answer any questions or run through any of the components of that program if you have any after this talk or at any point, really. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the majority of the information that I have to give you. There's all of that information and more on our website, pcicollege.ie, and there's a number of different talks on the YouTube channel here that give like snippets of information around those individual programs. So there will be a talk from the program leader of each program, which goes into more detail than I did today about the content. So if you're really interested, you could have a look there, or again, pick up the phone or drop an email to any of us here in the college, and we'll give you a call back and talk you through any questions that you might have. I don't see any questions popping up there, so I hope that means I've covered everything I need to cover, and it doesn't mean there's a lack of interest, but I'll take the former. So if there are no questions, then I might just sign off and say good evening and thank you for listening. And if there's anything else you need to know, feel free to contact me. My email is jlawless@pcicollege.ie. Or drop any of the team a message, info@pcicollege.ie. Thanks, everybody. Have a lovely evening.